Talk about hate and revenge.
Hate and revenge? You know, there's a Thai place in Roseville, I think it's called Mai Thai. Wonderful food. And they ask you, how spicy do you want it to be? And they give you from 0 to 10. And my sister usually gets 5, my wife usually gets 12. It's like, Abby. And your question is like that. It's very spicy. Okay, so hate and revenge, knowledge and judgment. Anyone else? We can connect them all together.
I'll throw in there indoctrination. People think when they're younger, trying to force them into one ideology.
Okay. So imposing on other people, especially young kids. Yeah, how they should be, what they should be, who they should be. Hello, Eugene. Any news? Yeah.
Submit my vaccines and stuff.
What?
Submit, physical
Oh, yeah.
vaccines, all that. It's a national source.
Yeah. Okay. Nothing? Yeah.
Talk about evil. What you're talking about?
People?
Evil.
Evil.
Evil can
Irredeemable
indoctrination, and knowledge.
evil.
Irredeemable evil?
Yeah.
Okay. Kind of like Freddy Krueger.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So, I'm sorry? Yeah, he was. So, Kinder? No. Betrayal? Okay.
So I realized I could probably give a sermon on just the Freddy Krueger piece.
So let's talk about knowledge and then judgment and then hate and revenge. An evil that can be corrected versus an evil that can't, and betrayal. And, right, indoctrination. So there are, the first part of your question, which has to do with knowledge, there is a kind of knowledge that you seek, and then there are knowledge or information or data that just comes your way automatically. The first kind where there's a sense of curiosity about you, where you say, I want to know something. You kind of give yourself a good amount of power, not just physical power, but powers of observation and reflection. There's a good amount of doubt and skepticism about you. You've kind of been betrayed by all the things you thought that you knew, only to realize they were mostly wrong, and now you're looking for something. As René Descartes would say, that there is no room for doubt in it. I'm not quite sure how possible that is, but nevertheless. The second is from the moment you're born, beginning from your temperament to the stuff that your mother eats before you even come out, the sort of disagreements that your parents have while you're still in the belly of your mother. And then you come out, their temperament, the sort of disagreements you hear and you witness, the sort of advertisements you get on a daily basis. So they are basically the foundation of what we call knowledge, usually, It's a story I've shared in the past. I'll do it nevertheless again. I had a student many, many years ago, some 20 years ago. He was just a young kid, maybe 3 or 4 or 5. He had a father who was problematic. And so one day he brings home a prostitute. And he forces his son, who I think at the time was maybe 3 or 4, to have sex with the prostitute. Now, if you were to ask yourself, what is the sort of knowledge or data or information or experience that a kid is going to have in regards to sex, in regards to women, in regards to intimacy, in regards to parenthood, in regards to anger, when the foundation is being built at the age of 3? And so, by the time he came to my class, he was a 20-year-old young man filled with anger, hatred, and revenge. But it's very difficult for us to go back in time to figure out exactly what took place that made us the way we are. So he would usually take his anger out on people, especially on women, and then in the classroom. And one of the ways, of course, he kind of found some comfort. He enjoyed reading books, good books, meaningful books, books that had a good amount of depth to them, philosophically speaking. And then in classroom, when we had conversations, he would raise his hand and he would talk. And it would be really, really nice to just hear him talk. He was very eloquent, articulate, but he had this anger in his voice, and it was palpable. And so his knowledge about relationships really went all the way back to the time he was 3 or 4. And it's something that David Hume talked about around the 17th century. If you want to know who you are and what you are, close your eyes, sit somewhere, and go back in time, as far back as you can remember, and try to picture all the events that took place in your life. You've never been to Africa, you've never been to the Middle East, you've never been to India, so you don't really have much knowledge about those places, except, the tiny little paragraphs you may have read in books. And you realize something really interesting that I borrow from David Hume, which is, if you're a human being, you are limited in all sorts of ways. You're limited physically, you're limited intellectually, so your knowledge base is going to be limited. But that doesn't exempt you from taking this other step, which is, even though you don't know much about a certain culture, you allow yourself to pass a judgment, to come to a conclusion. One of the difficult things about, say, what's happening in the Middle East right now in regards to Palestine and Israel is the politics of it is so enormously complicated, and we have so little knowledge, But that doesn't exempt us from feeling a certain way, because we are emotional animals. Acquiring knowledge takes a long, long time. You need to be patient, you need to be interested, curious, passionate. And none of us, have the luxury of having those qualities to us. So that's the first thing you need to understand about knowledge. There's only so much you can know. And the funny thing is, the older you get, the more you know, or maybe the more you understand, but the less you know. Okay? Now, you're young. I don't know how much you know. My estimation would be very little. You may have had a lot of experiences in your little life, short life, and those experiences may have given birth to a great amount of intense emotions, maybe a reflection, but understanding is not there yet. You just have a lot of emotions about you, and you take them to be understanding, but they're not, they're just emotions. So no one can go beyond what they have experienced. And because we only have 5 or 10 friends in our lives, and because we are limited to a sort of advertisement that brings about pleasure, some of them are painful. So our entire life, really, the way we think about things and feel about things are profoundly limited. Now, let's also differentiate between judgment and observation. Okay. Sometimes you can come to a conclusion based on what little you have observed. And that observation has a good amount of reflection, observation, examination, honesty in it. That's a nice conclusion to get to. And as time passes, you realize that events happen and life pushes you to kind of look through other windows, and all of a sudden you realize your perspective is beginning to change. And the thing about observation is that if you're trained into being a student of life, that you observe and then you come to a conclusion, you don't really have an attachment to a conclusion that's definitive. You have given yourself this wide range of options. Judgment is very, very, very different. It's like it's a wonderful story that comes from, I think, the Gospel of Matthew, or maybe it's the Gospel of Luke, where there is this woman who's been sleeping around. She gets caught, and all the rabbis chase her to where Jesus is sitting, and they all are holding a stone or a rock, and they're about to, the idea that you can stone someone to death. And because Jesus has gained some popularity and fame amongst the Jews, especially the rabbis and the Sadducees, before they can actually stone her to death, they look at Jesus and say, "So, Rabbi, what should we do with this adulterous woman?" And he kind of looks at them and says, "Those without sin, let them cast the first stone." So what you have are two different perspectives. The rabbis are not so much about observation. They simply are men of faith. They like to believe. The belief system gives them, good morning, belief system gives them power, meaning, belonging. They imagine themselves to know what's going on in the mind of God, who has written the Old Testament. They don't really care that it took about 1,000 years for these 38 books to be collected, written by who, God knows. Were they politically motivated? Who knows? Religiously motivated? Who knows? Did they, change words and concepts? Who knows? But they just like to believe. And because they wear a certain outfit, that outfit separates them from the commoners, gives them a good amount of power. And so they stand here, and the commoners sit here. And so anyone in their eyes who does anything wrong, they have the power to make a judgment and make their lives really, really, really painful and awful. The other camp is the camp of Jesus. He kind of looks back at the human condition and he says, I don't really know what we can know. We are not in the mind of God. We have no idea what, imagine if, good morning. Imagine if you were to make a judgment about Malcolm X at the age of 15, at the age of 16, at the age of 17, at the age of 19, at the age of 20. This is a guy who runs into all sorts of difficulties. He ends up in prison. And you would kind of dismiss him saying, well, he's African American in America and he's in prison. It's a life that's not going to have a good outcome. Now, if you were to suspend that judgment and simply observe, and observation simply means you kind of look at life, you realize how grand everything is, and you say, you know what? From what I see a guy in jail. There are possibilities. He may get killed in jail, in prison. He may get a parole at some point. He's going to come out in society, but he's not going to be digestible. He's going to go back. And there is this tiny little chance that he may run into an Elijah Muhammad. And so again, if you happen to be in the Jesus camp, you realize the complexities of life and you say, all human beings have no choice but to commit errors in life, mistakes, regrettable mistakes. And though she may be a prostitute today, like, Pretty Woman, Richard Gere, and who's that woman? Julia Roberts. she also has the capacity to eventually fall in love and become monogamous. Okay. Now, from a distance, they kind of both look the same, judgment and observation. But it takes some time and some interest for you to kind of sit with the person who has the judgment or the observation. And if you happen to be a very keen and insightful student, you walk away saying, well, that's a judgment, and that's a conclusion based on a certain set of observations that could possibly change in the future. If you're a parent, it's difficult to make observations. Everything is a judgment. Because you worry about their future. To observe is to be open, to be non-judgmental, and that's not what parents do. You know, it's very, very tough.
Does that have to do with emotional investment? You pass
Yeah.
a judgment when you're more emotionally invested in something, or
I guess so. I mean, you see them on a daily basis. They suck as little animals go. But, you know, I mean, they mess everything up. But nevertheless, you kind of late at night, you say, okay, what's going to become of this person or that person? How am I going to protect them? I mean, you invest in them emotionally, money-wise. You sit and talk to them about things they really don't understand, don't even care to understand. So you invest in your kids in all sorts of different ways. Unless you're the Buddha, that's a different story. Or Moses, Jesus Christ, or Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Christ had kids, right? Later. After he, I guess, came back.
The story is, it's just getting juicy. I'm just kidding. It's good to see you, Kendra. Good morning. I don't know if Christ had kids.
He doesn't.
Yeah. You know, there's a passage in the Gospel of Matthew where, or is it the Gospel of Mark, where it says that he laid with his disciples. And so there is, in fact, a Bible, a New Testament, that is like the gay version of Jesus.
That's what I was going to say.
You know, so they take one verse and they say, oh, well, it says right there he laid with the disciples, so he must be gay or, or pan or plate or bull or, I don't know. Yeah. So, so does that, yeah. I'm just going to fail you in this class, not because I know you, not because I know your future. I'm just joking, of course. Based on what I see on Canvas, the number of assignments you've submitted, that's the only knowledge I have. I can't all of a sudden create this narrative that, this guy is going to be the next Socrates 20 years from now. I don't know. And it's something that the victim should understand really, really well. You. Because you are under an avalanche of my judgment, and I only know so much about you, and I only can have so much access to you. I don't know your life, and I don't really have the time. And if I was to be a bit more honest, I really don't have the care to know your life and what's taking place in it. I know everyone is burdened. They're confused. They're trying to figure something out there. So if you haven't turned in work, I'll just fail you. Doesn't mean I don't like you. It may suggest, on the other hand, that very much like Malcolm X, 20 years from now, you may come to my class, say, Amir, you remember me? I say, no, who are you? Oh, you failed me. Oh, yes, I did. I should tell you, I went to Yale, got my PhD and postdoc in philosophy. Ooh. So. Let me tell you one last story about knowledge and experience and judgment. We were sitting in a gathering some 30, 40 years ago, and one of my good friends, Saeed, with whom we used to play music for 20 years or so, he was a political prisoner. At any rate, his sister came in, and his sister had come from Iran recently. And I don't know if you know much about my country or not, but the regime for the past 40 years has been brutal. It has made the life of its people hell. You know, women don't have rights, men don't have rights. 60% of the population, if not 70, they're under the age of 30, and they're hopeful, they want jobs, they want to go to school, but no one has any money. So everyone's unemployed, they're on drugs, they're depressed. The country is just bubbling with anger, hatred, and revenge. Good morning. So she comes in and she's listening to Hussein talking about various things about life. And after 5 hours of Hussein talking, he gives us about 10 minutes. That was his custom. And he says, well, you know, I've talked for 5 hours. If you guys have any questions, we have 10 minutes. And this young woman, who was really no longer that young, but young nevertheless, she looks at him and says, I really have enjoyed everything that you said, and I want to be a student of yours. I just can't do the Islamic prayer. And they got to do it 5 times a day, you know. Is there any other way that I can be allowed to come in and listen and not do this other stuff? And he looks at her and he says, well, you don't really have to do the prayer, but it's an exercise that I have done. It's an exercise that all these other people at this gathering have done. I'm not a Buddhist, he said. I'm not a Hindu. I'm not an atheist. I'm a Muslim. And this is how I learned my stuff. You know. So prayer is obligatory for those who come to this gathering. This particular kind of prayer, this exercise. If, because of being in Iran, seeing what you've seen about what religion has done to people, if this type of exercise is something that makes you puke, I don't know any other way. He's not condemning her. What he's saying is, you probably are not going to get very much from the things I'm going to say, simply because the very core of everything I teach has to do with religion and religious traditions, Islamic tradition. So maybe you should go find yourself a Taoist, or a Buddhist, or a Hindu. And so, you know, you have a man who's come to understand the limits of his knowledge and what he can and can't do, and what he can give and what he can't give. You know, and he doesn't want to dangle you around saying, well, just come to these gatherings because I want more followers, you know, or more students. And then you can figure things out later. He kind of just goes out for the jugular and says, if you want to come, you got to pray. And you got to be this way. So once you know your own capacity, then you can be a bit more honest and a bit more clear with people. There is this book called The Awakened Dreams. I don't know if you've ever read the book. It's really not very good. It's actually great. There is this young kid, very much like you, walking around town, kind of in a daze, confused, angry, not to the point of hate and revenge. And he walks into the cemetery. For some strange reason, it just looks really, really alluring. So he walks in, and all of a sudden this man comes out. He's about 50. He's wearing this cap with like 5,000 mirrors glued to it. And he doesn't know if he should laugh or he should salute him, but he looks at this man and says, can I kiss your hand? And the guy says, kiss my hand? What are you, stupid? Let's sit and have a conversation. I'll make you some coffee. And then he doesn't even engage in conversation. He says, what's the use of having a conversation? You probably read the entire books held by Berkeley Library. You're going to just spit all this information, and I'm not really as smart as you are. let's just have some coffee. They drink coffee, and then he brings out this instrument. It's a flute, it's a ney. I'll spare you the story of, this particular instrument that has profound symbolic meaning for especially the Persians. And he begins to play this instrument, and this young kid finds himself entranced. And he lays on this tombstone in the cemetery, and he has all these wonderful experiences. And what you realize is yet another kind of observation, reflection about knowledge. It can only take you so far. It can only take you so far. Eventually, all the self-help books, all the therapy sessions you may walk into, they're going to fall extremely short. If you really are looking for change, someone needs to walk into your life and give you practical experiences. Like Job. Not talk about pain, not talk about loss. Let him have the pain. Let him have the loss. Let him experience the grief. Let him experience the darkness, the loneliness, the confusion, and the thoughts of suicide. Let him experience all of that. That brings about humility. That's the best knowledge you will ever have in your life. And from that point on, no one can ever deceive you. Does that? Hatred and revenge. Let me just add to Chandler's question about judgment a little bit. I don't know how you feel about broccoli, but your palate is going to make a judgment. Trust it. It's not going to deceive you. Some judgments come exactly from your body, and you need to trust it.
What about an acquired taste?
It's acquired. Yeah. Well, you manipulate your body.
It takes time.
Yeah, it takes time. You manipulate your body until it digests to the awful taste of alcohol. Or just stupid people. Then there is the judgment that comes through your senses, but most importantly, your eyes. You go out and you see this guy pouncing on this other guy. And the other guy who's getting beaten up really is a little weak, a little smaller than this other guy, and you feel this, you're enraged. You want to defend him. You hate this bigger guy for, beating this little guy. And you go to help. And you start beating up this guy on the top. But you don't know the backstory. That this little guy went into his house with a gun, killed his son, killed his wife, and ran away. And the father, the husband, runs after him and doesn't care if he gets shot. But that is the background you're missing. So your cause furthers the injustice, And so before you take any action because of the things you have seen, and before you come to a conclusion or a judgment, it's always good to kind of stand back and kind of ask yourself some questions. That's going to be problematic because it may in fact be true that the little guy did absolutely nothing. So it's really your call. There are judgments that come to you from the intellectual level, that you read some books and you assume that the books are right or the author is right about some conclusions. It's kind of like what is that movie with Robin Williams, Matt Damon, and Ben Affleck? Good Will Hunting. That, they find themselves in this bar. He wants to impress this girl. He's taking a poli-sci class, this other kid. And he wants to impress this girl with all the books is read in the first grade. And then Matt Damon, who's a genius, comes to him and says, oh, everything you've said is absolutely good, but wait till you get to the second grade and wait until you get a different set of books with a different set of ideas. And then you'll come to realize everything you've learned in the first grade was wrong. And so you realize intellectually you're so limited, and the sort of events that life will bring forth will force us to change our perspectives. Unless you're just an idiot and you just want to be blind and not look at what is presented to you by life. Okay. And that gets into bias, comfortability, routine, conformity, validation, which we won't get into. So you're on your own on that. Good luck. Hate is the grandfather of emotions, and I suppose revenge that may take a violent shape may be the grandfather of the grandfather. So let's kind of do this systematically. What you have is an experience. An experience happens to be unpleasant, and the tragedy of this particular experience is that you experience it doesn't go away. It stays with you either in your body, you think about it all the time because it was kind of intense, and then it repeats itself, not just psychologically, but more unlucky for you physically as well. That let's just say you go home, your father is drunk, he screams. It's not a pleasant experience because your mom is sitting there crying, your sister is under the table hiding, and you have to see all of this. And it's a horrifying situation. And you may be an atheist, but you pray to God that maybe your father can just go for a walk, cool off and come back home. But it's something just now goes inside, it's like quicksand. And as you think about it more, it takes more root. And then you replay it in your head, day after day after. And it could be that your father has remained sober for the next 60 years. But, and if he has, that memory slowly fades into oblivion. If on the other hand, you see the event, the physical event happening day after day after day, the unpleasantness, the negativity becomes, you want to find a way, and that's what we do. We're problem solvers, and that's why our frontal lobe, and that's why we have such a big brain for being so tiny and pathetic. Life is complicated. We are at an enormous disadvantage compared to all the other beasts under the sun, and you want to figure things out. From the moment you wake up, you got to figure out what exactly it is you want to do in the day that gives you a relative amount of meaning, so you don't walk home in despair and disgust about yourself and your life. And you don't have to take a philosophy class for that. And if someone asks you, well, what's the benefit of thinking? Well, look around you, stupid. You can't leave house without it, your home without it. And so you try to figure out how you can calm your mom, how you can calm your sister, how you can remove the anxiousness that lives inside you. And above all, because you have seen your father on good days and because you love him, you want to find a way to remedy all the stuff. You want to find this iron that's really hot, that steam is coming out, to iron out all the wrinkles. And you think, and you think, and you do all sorts of things. And you talk to your father, you read in the Bible, you take him to church, you take him to AA, but to no avail. He comes back a week later, and of course he has his own reasons. Life, creates a good amount of pressure inside us, and if you're not refined enough, you explode, naturally. And so you see this every week, and it gets more. And then the anxiety turns into frustration, and then confusion, and then you become helpless. It's such an awful place to be. And when you feel helpless, it's like being devoured by the quicksand. It's like divorcing. It's not like you wake up one morning and say, I want a divorce. You lay in bed, you toss and you turn and you think and you try to work things out in your head, and you try to work things out outside of your head with your companion, but nothing works. And you say, well, I don't want to be the first one who is going to divorce, in the family, shame and guilt, and God forbid if you happen to be religious, especially Catholic, then you have like an additional pressure upon you. You're angry with yourself, you're angry with your parents, you're angry because you were stupid enough to marry this chap. Either you're angry because now the kids, they're not going to have their father or their mother around all the time. You're angry because you don't know what to tell your parents. I mean, you have a great amount of explosive emotions about you. But you're mature enough, refined enough to keep everything within you. Maybe you do music, maybe you go on a walk. I don't know what the hell people do these days. Maybe you smoke, maybe you drink moderately. But all of us in this class have a certain capacity, certain trash bin that has a specific size to it. Some people have the capacity, like Jesus Christ, to carry the sins of humanity, or Malcolm X. Some people are like Gandhi. He has the power to carry the burdens of 400 million Indians, and 40,000 British. And because he has perspectives, because he knows how human beings are made, he passes no judgments on the British or his countrymen, But that is his capacity. Now, wrongly, of course, you and I begin to read these books and we assume that if Gandhi did it, I can do it as well. But your capacity to hold trash is very small. Maybe it's a gallon. Okay. And you realize that you have seen enough of your father, you have seen enough of the pain that lives inside your mom, your sister, and then you begin to scream at your father. And in fact, you begin to grab him by the throat and you begin to punch him. Or maybe not those things, because they are kind of awful. But you begin to have this hatred about you.